We're going to talk today about law enforcement's worst day, the Uvalde shooting. 5 things we know now that we may not have known about that shooting. That and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. Well, what some people are saying, the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. Well, now, folks, I guess we have more information from investigations. That's into the way that the police handled the Uvalde school shooting there in Texas. And my friend, I'm afraid it's not pretty. In fact, it's most tragic. Now, I do realize we're what we call Monday morning quarterbacking in these matters. But anyone who ever puts on a badge and a gun, well, we're already aware of the fact that Monday morning quarterbacking is always going to be a part of the process. It has to be. Lives are at stake. But before we dive into today's episode, let me take a moment to welcome you to our podcasts. Well, we've now received thousands of downloads of our podcasts. And I got to tell you, folks, we're humbled and honored to have you as a part of our listening audience. From the East Coast to the West Coast of America, and in other parts of the world, we're happy to have you as a part of the Charlie Crimebuster family. In fact, I want to urge you to reach out with a shout-out. Reach out with a shout-out. You can reach me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And I'm going to respond back to you with a personal appreciation gift for taking the time to reach out. Hey, you can ask questions, give suggestions, give opinions, even if they do not agree with ours, and every comment will be welcomed. Again, reach me directly, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Now, we're going to put that in the show notes so that you can look back and know where to go. Also, let me ask you to please consider being a part of our support. That is, to the men and women who are our heroes. And in spite of what happened there in Texas, my friend, there are thousands of men and women who do not hesitate for one moment to rush into danger to protect us and others. That's our law enforcement, our first responders, and our military. Hey, you can learn how you can support this ongoing program. You can support these heroes by going to our nonprofit platform, peacemakernetwork.com, peacemakernetwork.com. And for as little, get this, as $3 a month, as little as $3 a month, you can do something important. You can become a badge, B-A-D-G-E, badge supporter. That again, peacemakernetwork.com. It will be in the show notes. Now to our main focus, the Uvalde school shooting. I call it law enforcement's worst day. There are some things that we do know now that we may not have known before, at least to the point that we do today. We do know that there was plenty of blame to go around that day. Because, number one, there were red flags that was missed about this school shooter. You see, he had already asked two people, not one, but 2 people, to make a gun purchase for him. That was before he was of the age to make the purchase himself. He had bragged online about his actions, according to official reports. You see, this gunman foreshadowed his plans for a mass shooting by several interactions on social media. He actually referenced doing something in May that would, quote, get this, make him famous and put him all over the news. Now, when you hear that, someone posting, I'm going to do something in May that will make me famous and put me all over the news, wouldn't that give you a cause for concern? Maybe you might want to report that. You see, today, social media can be used as a tool to identify possible mass shooters. Well, there are even people that are devoted to looking for those clues every day. And in my opinion, every department ought to have such a task force looking, just like we have patrol cars patrolling the streets watching. There needs to be media patrol of what we post in a public forum. Now that, my friend, is not an invasion of privacy. When you post on public forums, you do not have an expectancy of privacy. Very often, mass shooters have a desire to be known. In fact, one thing that usually is certain about these people is that this is their moment to be noticed. And they often telegraphed it ahead of time. Well, this guy posted, but those postings were ignored. Hey, there was something else that was ignored. When the shooter turned 18, that's the legal age for purchasing a rifle in Texas. He did that on May the 16th. That very same day, he purchases an AR-15 style rifle. Daniel Defense AR-15 style rifle. And get this, along with that purchase, 1,740 rounds of ammunition. Well, the next day, he purchases a Smith & Wesson AR-15 rifle. Then he returns the following day to purchase an additional 375 rounds of ammo. And get this, in total, he spends $4,896 on weapons, ammo, and accessories. That seems a little odd to me for an 18-year-old to make that type of a purchase. Now, does this mean that anybody who makes such a purchase is guilty of planning a mass shooting? No, of course not. It really not even probable cause, but it is what investigators call, quote, a reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion to take a closer look at someone. For example, as a patrol officer, if I saw someone driving at night with their headlights off, well, it could be that they just forgot to turn them on. Street lights were on. They were not aware their lights were not on. Or it could be they were impaired and should not be driving. Or it could be they were casing out a neighborhood for a robbery to break in and they did not want to be noticed. Either way, as a cop, I do want to take a close look at them. And in that case, I would have probable cause to stop and ask them what's going on, find out. And my friend, when an 18-year-old makes that type of purchase, maybe a store owner should take note, ask authorities to take a look. And while at the same time we have to be careful not to violate one's civil rights, at least we can talk to his parents and others around him and find out if something is going on, maybe even do some surveillance on that type of person. So, yes, just as in many of these mass shootings, there were signs that were ignored with this gunman. The lesson's very simple. If you see something, say something. Now, there's a second thing that we know now about law enforcement's worst day, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But right now, it's time for what we call our Crazy Crook Story. We try to share Crazy Crook stories. Kind of lighten the load of some of the heavy things we cover. And they come from all over the world. This one from Minnesota. Well, this guy, appears he was a little unhappy about a 20-month prison sentence he was given. And he demonstrated his unhappiness to serve time, in the most obvious way that he could think of. He simply ran out of the courthouse as fast as he could. Now, this 25-year-old resident, Alexander Rivera, he was appearing in a Detroit Lakes courthouse Wednesday. There, now get this, he was there to be sentenced for escaping from custody back in May 2021. Now, Rivera, he had previously posted a $15,000 bail. He was not in custody when he appeared for the hearing, but when he found out he was going to be sent to prison, Rivera, he took off and he did not look back. You see, after being sentenced to just 20 months in prison, Rivera fled the second floor courtroom. He ran out of the house. That's what Becker County Sheriff's Office said in a statement. Now, deputies immediately went after him, but Rivera, he was a little too fast, and he could not be found in that surrounding area. Rest assured, my friend, Popo was on the run after him, and deputies eventually tracked him down. That was about 8 hours later. He was then taken into custody. And now, you guessed it, additional charges which will likely lead to a much longer prison sentence than 20 months, are now expected to be filed against Rivera. So, my friend, if you don't like a 20-month sentence for escaping police custody, just run again, and now you'll get an even longer sentence. And that, my friend, is our crazy crook story of the week. Now, there's a second thing we know now about this worst day of law enforcement, and that was that the information that was given, well, it was sketchy at first. You see, my friend, we do live in an instant coffee sort of society, don't we? We have little patience. We want it all right now. We used to have to wait days to get a letter from someone. Now, well, we complain if an email takes more than 10 seconds to load. Along with a lack of patience, we now demand for instant information. Police departments did have a reason for not releasing information right away. Actually, more than one reason. One was not to tip off person or persons involved in the crime. Another reason is that the investigation is a process. You see, you're constantly gathering information, and you have to review that information, and you have to clarify that information. But now, because of a demand of the people and a desire for police transparency, well, information is released so quickly that some of that information is not exactly accurate. In this case, it became quite noticeable right at the start. If you're familiar with this case at all, you no doubt heard about the teacher that allegedly had propped open a door. It was reported that this was the way that the gunman got into the school. We know now that that was not accurate. You see, the teacher who earlier propped open the door on the west side of the building, she saw the gunman approaching. She slammed the door shut. She yells for students to get into their classroom. She calls 911. All of this according to school surveillance footage. Now remember, authorities originally said the teacher had left the door propped open. But, my friend, it wasn't totally true. She had propped it open, but she slammed it shut. It was supposed to lock. So some of the information that was quickly released before a thorough review of body cam, surveillance cameras, and interviews with collaborating witnesses was not accurate. Now please note I said collaborating witnesses. You see, it may surprise you to know that an eyewitness is not always reliable. If we were in a group of all of us and we witnessed a car wreck at the same time, you'd be amazed at how many people in our group that their eyewitness report would vary, and at times not line up with each other's report. You see, while eyewitnesses are considered evidence, they're not always accurate evidence. Let me give you another example of sketchy reporting on the information that was not confirmed. You see, several of the news outlets, they reported this. They reported an Uvalde police officer that he asked the supervisor's permission to shoot the gunman who would soon kill 21 people at Robb Elementary School in May. That he asked to shoot him before he entered the building. They also reported the supervisor did not hear the request or responded too late. That was according to released information evaluating law enforcement response to the shooting. You see, the request from the Uvalde officer, who was outside the school about a minute before the gunman entered Robb Elementary, well, that had not been previously reported, but then it was reported that another reason was he was afraid of the possibility of shooting children while attempting to take out the gunman. But now we know some new stuff. You see, a Texas committee investigating the Uvalde shooting, well, they issued a report on this same incident that concluded that police officer did not see a gunman outside of Robb Elementary, but instead he had spotted a school coach. That's right, it was a school coach. And by the way, it was the same coach that had warned the students. You see, the gunman, you could see him tossing a backpack over the 5-foot fence that was around the perimeter of the school. Then he climbs over it. And then Robb Elementary coach Sylvia sees the gunman begin to shoot. She runs around, the coach does, tells the group of third graders to lock down. She then used the school radio to report the incident. She said this, Coach Sylvia to office. Somebody just jumped over the fence and he's shooting. You see, my friend, just realize that as law enforcement is pressured to get out information quickly, we're going to see more and more of these inaccuracies in the reports. You see, the FBI had always had a policy of stating that they do not comment on ongoing investigations. Now, of course, that was before Jim Comey, of course, who opened his mouth and commented on Hillary Clinton's emails and stuck his foot in his mouth, not once, but twice. So now that time has gone on, we do have more accurate information to report. And there is a third thing that we now know. There was no doubt systematic failure on this awful day. You see, my friend, law enforcement lost critical momentum by treating this situation as a barricaded situation. This was an active shooter situation, not a barricaded situation. And in an active shooter situation, you breach by any means possible. And you do that because you want to do two things immediately. Number one, you want to do whatever you can and need to do to stop the threat, life threat, stake. And next, number two, you render medical aid. Now, both of these things were not done in a timely fashion. As a result of that, people died. Waiting for shields, a sniper, tools, keys, well, all of that shows a lack of urgency on the part of law enforcement. You see, my friend, the police had enough officers and firepower on the scene to have stopped this gunman 3 minutes after he entered the building. And more importantly, get this. They would have found that door that they could not penetrate. They would have found that door to be unlocked if they had bothered to check it. That's right, you heard me. The door that took them over 1 hour to find keys to unlock, well, that gunman was seen on surveillance video going in and out of that door. Because, my friend, the doors were not locking properly on that dreadful day of law enforcement's worst day. They could have been in there and stopped him 3 minutes after he entered the school. Oh, but we were told they were waiting for other tools, other protection. What do you mean other tools and other protection? My friend, these police officers had weapons, including rifles. They had body armor that may or may not have stopped the rifle rounds, but they had training, they had backup. But, get this, the victims, the teachers, the children in that classroom, they had none of those things. It is no wonder the committee concluded that the performance of law enforcement that day was an abject failure. Now, there's a fourth thing that we now know for sure. You see, there was a lack of incident command. Even a rookie police officer knows the importance of having an incident commander on a crisis situation. Someone has to take command. Now, the Uvalde school police chief, a guy by the name of Aaron Dondo, he was on the scene, and while he now says he did not realize he was the incident commander, thought of himself as only a first responder, well, we have a saying in Tennessee about that. It's called hogwash. You see, this man had taught his staff what to do in a school shooting. That included a need for an incident commander. He was there in that hallway. He was calling the shots. And he did make a serious judgment call that was wrong, an incorrect one. A call that cost lives. Now, it was reported that they did not know that there were others in the classroom that the gunman went into. However, shots were heard before. They had to know that people were in there bleeding out who were in need of desperate help. You see, it appeared in the video that he was more in focus, he and the people in the hallway were more in focus on keeping people out of the hallway from entering the room and getting to the gunman. In fact, one of the police officers, his wife was in that classroom. She had already been shot. She sent a text to her husband that she had been shot. He started to go in with his handguns toward that door, but was turned away, taken back out of the hallway, and they even took his gun away from him. That incident commander should have been doing the opposite. He should have been issuing commands on his radio to breach that classroom. He should be sending officers to the roof, to the outside windows. Hey, there's an idea. If you do think the door is locked, if there's a steel door that opens outward, you cannot kick it in, you think it's locked, you don't have the keys to open the door, you can't get in there any other way, why not try entering the window? You see, there's even an example of that, of how it was used to stop a gunman. It was in 2006. Heavily armed man stormed the West Nickel Mines, a one-room Amish school building in Bart Township, Pennsylvania. He stormed in there. He ordered the male students and teachers out of the room. He took the girls hostage. Teacher called the police at 10:30 a.m. First officer was on the scene 7 minutes later. And while waiting for backup, he was attempting to negotiate with the gunman. Now, at that point, this shooter had barricaded the door with bolts and lumber that he brought with him. He had not yet fired any shots. As soon as the shots rang out at 11:07 a.m., well, the police, they were going to get to him. They even attempted to enter the classroom through a window. And as they were breaching the building, going through that window, the gunman committed suicide. You see, my friend, even an attempt at breaching can lead a gunman to take their own lives. But this chief, this incident commander, all he used was words to ask the gunman, please put his gun down, stop shooting. Oh, my friend, this is truly law enforcement's worst day. And that teacher who was shot and bleeding, who contacted her husband who was turned away, his gun taken, well, when they finally did breach the classroom 1 hour later, well, she died. She died while they were putting her in the ambulance. You know, had she been reached sooner, she may have lived. Had they breached sooner, several more may have been saved. There are other things that we learned about that scene, but now it's time for our Courageous Citizen of the Week. This guy by the name of Eli Dickin, he was an armed citizen. Now get this, he stopped a mass shooter in an Indiana mall on Sunday. He was carrying a pistol under the state's recently enacted constitutional carry law. That went into effect on July the 1st. And get this, just 15 seconds after this mass shooter opened fire, well, Dickin, he steadied himself on a pole. He fired 8 to 10 shots with his pistol, striking the gunman from 40 yards away. Police says that his actions was nothing short of heroic. He engaged the gunman from quite a distance with a handgun. Very proficient in that. Tactically sound. And as he moved to close in on the suspect, he was also motioning for people to exit behind him. That's what the Greenwood police chief said, according to WTHR. He went on to say many people would have died last night if not for a responsible armed citizen that took action very quickly within the first 2 minutes of the shooting. And my friend, one man with a pistol stops a mass shooter within 2 minutes. And in our story today, 376 officers waited over an hour to take out a shooter that was killing kids and teachers. But this man with a pistol, who did not wait, who did not hesitate, he is indeed our Charlie Crimebuster Courageous Citizen of the Week. Next, another thing that we know now was that definitely there was a failure of communication on the scene. You see, it seems that everyone was communicating except the incident commander, Arredondo. Kids were calling the police, telling them that they were trapped with this gunman. They were begging police to come in and get them. They were calling 911, and yet our incident commander says, well, he didn't know that. But maybe if he had a radio that he had not forgotten, he would have known. Again, there is a failure to communicate. It's also been said that there was a Wi-Fi problem at the school, places where police radios may not work. If so, my friend, those problems should have been worked out prior to a mass shooting. You see, communication to kids and teachers warning them to take shelter? Well, my friend, that is critical. Communication to the incident commander telling him or her what is going on? That is critical. Communications from the incident commander issuing critical orders to breach from all means possible? That is critical. And all of that was missing on this awful day in law enforcement. Another fact that was brought out of this investigation was that there was a failure to take the possibility of a mass shooter on a school seriously. You see, while it is true that they had an active shooter drill a couple months before this, it does appear, my friend, they did not take it seriously enough. First, why was it that the Uvalde School Police Department, why did they not have a way to access any possible area that a gunman might be found in a mass shooting situation? There should have been keys readily available to law enforcement, clearly marked. It is asinine to see the chief there waiting almost an hour to get a key, and then to waste precious time checking several keys to see which key may work. Keys should have been either on the police, in their vehicles, or handed to them as they entered the school, and those keys should have been marked clearly. Well, also, we find now that doors not locking as they should have at the school. Well, my friend, that too shows the lack of urgency. That kept that problem from being solved. Even though there had been, now get this, over 40 instances of lockdown on the campus. They had been locked down 40 times from February to May. They were locked down on what many people call bailouts. You see, this was a border area. Law enforcement's constantly chasing down illegal immigrants. And when they chase them down in pursuit, then they usually bail out of the cars and they run. Trucks, they run. And when they're in an area of schools, well, there's a lockdown, rightly so. I mean, who knows who's running from the police? Could be pedophiles, drug war runners, dangerous people. And over 40 times from February to May, it's reported that this school had been locked down. You might think at that point they might ought to realize that they should make sure that all the doors are locking properly. You see, my friend, there is plenty of blame to pass around. But I cannot get around the fact that the bulk of the blame has to go to law enforcement. You'd never wait to go after an active shooter. There were even other law enforcement there that should have stood up to the chief, assumed control that day. Police should have been seen doing everything possible to get to that shooter. They should have made such a response that the shooter would have to spend his time going after the police instead of precious children. You always make yourself the target before the children. My friend, more than 9 out of 10 police officers would tell you that they would go through that door to save children, even if it cost them their lives. That's what we do. That's what we're trained to do. That's what we have sworn to do. And police that day waited way too long to go after that shooter. Yep, there are lessons to learn for sure. And in fact, there are lessons that they already knew, just they did not do what they should have done. So my friend, make sure if you have children that your police know how to get to every square inch of your school to confront an active shooter. Now in our county here, in Volusia County, well, we've been assured by our sheriff that he himself would be the first through the door to save our children. Hopefully, your law enforcement would do the same. And we must all remember that as terrible of a day that law enforcement had, law enforcement's worst day, well, my friend, it was far, far worse for the parents of precious children and families of children that lost their lives that day. Pray for them. Pray for them. So, until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster saying, be safe, be alert, for the life you save may be your very own.